Hello friends of Powerhouse Bakery and all my favorite divas and dudes. I'm so excited to have you here in my kitchen. I'm Suzanne Parker and I'm the founder and CEO of Powerhouse Bakery. And what we do here is show the world that healthy can taste amazing. And what I want to do today is go back into recipes. It's my absolute favorite way to show you how healthy can really taste amazing. What we're going to do today is go over some of the healthiest stuff on earth. I have talked with you in the past about creating your best foods list. And so what I'm going to do is share some of my best foods list and help you see how I've brought to life what I think is a really healthy and easy menu. We're going to be going over a very popular and kind of old-fashioned rice dish today, and we're going to be using some very traditional ingredients. If any of you have chatted with me or come to one of my classes, you might have known that I spent a long time in France. I lived with a French family and I studied French for about 10 years, and je parle en français, alors il y a longtemps jusque je parle en français, alors j'adore la langue. So anyway, I was saying that I love the French culture. And so what I'm going to do today is use one of their old-fashioned recipes, and I'm going to make it a little bit healthier, because it wouldn't be Powerhouse Bakery if it wasn't a little healthier than typical, right? So let me go over some of the ingredients. What I've got going on right here is one of my favorite things, and it's homemade vegetable broth. And so what I put in this beautiful pot is leftover veggies. So we call it kitchen scraps, but really it's kind of the best stuff. Celery, don't let any piece of the celery go into the trash. It's a great way just to save those pieces and make your own broth. And so even these little parts and pieces are exactly perfect. You can put these into plain water and it will add and transform the flavor of plain old water to an amazing vegetable broth. Of course, I have more than just celery in here. I also have some pieces of onion, and while I have little bits of chopped onion, you could absolutely use the paper skins on the outside. You could just use the bits and parts that you didn't use for your recipe. I also love to put in some herbs. So bay leaf or fresh thyme, there's lots of great ingredients of fresh herbs that you can add to this. And if you don't have your own herb garden, you can buy fresh herbs from H-E-B, and it's an easy way to really add fantastic flavor. So when you buy fresh herbs from the grocery store, they're going to come in a little bag, and what I recommend you do is, as soon as you can, take them out of that bag and wrap them in some paper towel and preserve them in a container in your fridge so they stay beautiful and fresh, just like this. And then, as you're creating your kitchen trash, make sure that you add in some of these beautiful sprigs right into your broth. And it makes a beautiful aroma, and oh my gosh, the smell and the flavor is amazing. You don't really need to add any salt. You can if you want, but what I'd recommend is leave it unsalted, and that way with any recipe, you can add the salt at that point. And so here I've got some fresh thyme, I've got some pieces of garlic, I've got those little pieces of onion, and I've got even a few bits of tomato. You don't want to put a lot of tomato in because it will in fact break down and really change the color. But again, if you like tomato and you want it to be a little more amber, you could of course add in more tomato. But I do add just a little bit. So this is something that's going to go into our specialty rice. So our recipe for the day is called a Portobello Risotto. So I'm hoping that you have the recipe in your hands as you get to go through this. And I want to identify some of the important ingredients. The arborio rice, white wine, of course vegetable broth that I just showed you, some wonderful shallots that have been sauteed, of course the mushrooms that we're going to slice, olive oil, thyme, bay leaf, and a little bit of that tomato. Let me show you what's unique about the arborio rice. This is a very special rice because of the way it absorbs liquid. So if you see, it's a very fine grain, it's a short rice, similar to basmati, but what makes this really special is that when you cook it slowly, it becomes very plump and starchy, so it has a wonderful texture. It wasn't long ago that folks would have a risotto as a main dish meal. If you went into an Italian restaurant, they also serve risotto as a main dish meal. And one thing that I always like to recommend is whenever we're using beautiful grains, we don't really need it to make it at the whole dish. And so this will be a side dish for us. And so I want to show you how we can make this not only healthier, but of course portion size is really important. Whenever we're building our best foods list, not only are they foods that are easy to prepare and easy to serve and maybe even easy to store, we also know that portion control is key whenever we're creating our best foods list. So a little bit of risotto, and it's called an arborio rice, and that's what you have to look for when you're purchasing this at HEB. Also, we have to have some white wine. So I happen to have purchased a Pinot Grigio. In general, you just want a fairly inexpensive wine. Don't get a Chardonnay, because we only want a little bit of that flavor to be coming through. And if you're spending a lot of money on a Chardonnay, something over $10 for sure, it's not going to do it justice. But a Pinot is nice because it's got a really crisp finish. It's not sweet, so that's the part we want as far as the wine flavors, but it's going to work really well in a dish that you cook. And what's key about this risotto is the slow cooking process. So you'll see as we go that the process is gradual as we're letting that rice absorb the liquid as we cook it. So as we go through our ingredients, we've got first some beautiful mushrooms that I'm going to chop. So you're going to want to get about a pound of these mushrooms, and you could get the large portobellos if you want. I think the babies are just fine. They work out great, and really since you're chopping them, you don't have to have a size that is key. If you're going to do a stuffed portobello, of course the mushroom cap is going to be really valuable. But I like these because they're very easy to eat. And whenever you chop the large portobello, it does have sort of a different look and texture. It becomes somewhat dark when you're preparing it. So these are beautiful. They look like a traditional white mushroom, but the flavor is slightly different. The wonderful difference of mushrooms is in the flavor of the types that we purchase. And that portobello has a wonderful kind of an earthy flavor that's a little bit stronger than your typical white mushroom. And so in this recipe, we're going to start with a dry saute of these mushrooms, and then we're going to add in the oil towards the end. So I've preheated my skillet, and I'm going to drop them in. And you didn't hear a sizzle because it's a dry skillet. Now this is where we're going to venture away from the traditional French cooking, because if any of you have ever cooked a French dish, lots of butter. And so I'm going to show you a way that we get just as much flavor and a lot less fat. So the mushrooms should be dry saute. I'm just going to let those gradually start cooking away, and we just want to make sure that there isn't too much in the pan. I'm actually going to do a smaller batch, because one of the things is if we put too many mushrooms in at once, they begin to steam instead of a saute. So we rarely want to get those going. Now, one thing I love too about mushrooms is they are high in minerals. You might have purchased mushrooms in the past and noticed that it says high in vitamin D on the package, and that is absolutely correct. So it's really the way that they're grown. You know, vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, and mushrooms don't actually like a lot of sunshine. They actually grow in the shade. So how does that happen? Well, they use a special light so that the mushrooms do grow really well, and it actually supplements them with the vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Vitamin D is actually difficult to get from foods. It's something that nature just doesn't give us a huge amount of. That's probably because we don't need a lot of it. However, vitamin D is really important in our immune system. One thing that I found so interesting when I was researching our immunity and how do we build our immunity, vitamin D as well as zinc and vitamin C are really important in building our immune system. In fact, the patients that are being hospitalized with COVID right now, they're getting mega doses of zinc, vitamin C, and D that truly does help to build their immune system. So I think it's so wonderful that now we also know a food that can help us build our immune system. So I'm going to keep chopping these. And again, when you're preparing your mushrooms, a medium slice, so about this thickness, is really all you need. I wouldn't labor over making them extra pretty because you're going to saute them. Whenever you wash your mushrooms, make sure you get them well dried, and it just needs to be a quick rinse. Since we're going to be cooking them, we don't have to worry too much about having debris on that mushroom. Just rinse them and that'll do it. You can also use a dry paper towel or a moist paper towel that's just been wrung out as much as you can. And just wiping the mushrooms would be just fine too. Now, I just bought these this morning, and so they are super fresh, and they're absolutely beautiful. So again, a quick chop. If you don't like using the stems, you can toss those away. And we are going to see how these little babies are doing. So take note here that they're starting to smell. See how you're getting a really pretty edge on these. I'm going to even bring my temperature up a little bit higher. I love this little cooktop because it gives me a temperature as well as the low, medium, high. You remember I always say it's really important to start with a nice hot skillet so you can get a beautiful saute going, and that's looking beautiful. I can even add in some of my thyme into my mushrooms. Notice the way that I'm taking the little baby leaves off. I'm just pulling them across the grain, and then the little tips I'm just pulling off with my fingernail. So that's going to add even more flavor to the beautiful mushroom. You can always salt at the end, so I always say keep salt to a minimum, and that way your product at the very end can be adjusted just at the table. Whenever you're cooking from scratch, it's really nice to keep it as lightly salted as possible. So now they're starting to get shiny, and I love how that's just starting to get sauteed. So notice that with no oil at all in the pan, they are looking gorgeous. I'm going to give them another minute or two, and then I'm going to transfer the next batch in there and let them cook. They look perfect. So again, if you wanted to use a portobello that was larger, you could even broil them. You could use the large pack style and put them in the broiler while you're letting those cook. You could be working on your risotto. Notice that I've got my broth that's already hot, so that's going to help in the cooking process also. All right, those look beautiful. I'm going to transfer them into my little pan here, and we are going to go to the next step. Now I'm going to saute my risotto. So now I'm going to put this in. So here's my risotto. Again, I'm putting it into a dry skillet. I want to also let this get toasted, and it's going to become really a pretty light amber color. So once the granules get nice and hot, I'm going to start adding in some of the other ingredients. So I'm letting them kind of toast here, and slowly I'm going to add in my olive oil. So if you don't already have some way to dispense your olive oil in a small amount, a little squeeze bottle is a great way to go. So I'm going to let it get toasty. And I'm just putting in enough to coat each of the kernels, a small amount. Now I've already done my mise en place, which again is a French term, and that means to have everything in its place. So I have pre-measured my amount of wine, and I also have some of my shallots that I had sauteed ahead of time. And so to make this work in your kitchen, the first thing you'll want to do is pre-saute your shallots and then your mushrooms, and you have them off into a side bowl that we're going to toss in, and it will be an absolutely beautiful dish. As we go through the recipe, it calls for 1½ cups of arboreal rice, and then 1/2 cup of white wine, and then I have 6 cups of vegetable stock here, 2 tablespoons of my sauteed shallots, and then 1 pound of portobello mushrooms. Now I'm doing just portions of it now so that you can see each step clearly. But just know that you can always add in other flavors. There's another fabulous dish that uses arboreal rice with butternut squash. And so same process where you're going to gradually cook it, and then at the very end you'll fold in some cooked butternut squash, and it's amazing. The flavors are different in that dish because instead of thyme, we actually use sage. But the same process would always be the same, where we're going to add in the fresh herbs as we go, and it becomes a wonderful dish that's full of aroma and great flavors. All right, that's coming along great. It's starting to get nice and amber color, soaking up the olive oil. As that's going on, I'm going to let my mushrooms cool, and I'm going to start one more saute, one more chopping batch, so you can see how all of those come together. Here they are. Here comes the shallots. Look how beautiful. And again, I did already saute those just so we can make sure they get a beautiful amber color, and it starts to really share that aroma and flavor with the arborio rice. So it's taking its time, and it's starting to really be pretty. We're just about ready now to add in the white wine, and so really that's going to be cooking off quite a bit. There won't be any alcohol left at the end, but let's hope there'll be lots of flavor. I'm going to give it just a minute to cook, and I'm going to chop up a little more onion and celery. So again, whenever you have some extra veggies nearby, it's always fun to add them in to a rice dish. I always say the more the better. So this is going to be about another tablespoon of red onion. Remember, when you do your cutting, keep the tip down and use the back end of your knife, and use that hand to keep pushing your veggie right up into the blade of the knife. It keeps it nice and neat, and you get a nice even cut. We don't have to have them too small, because again, it's going to really cook down nicely with our broth and the white wine. That's just about right. And I'm going to add a little bit more of our beautiful garlic. Remember, when you're going from the fresh garlic, I always think the fresh is the best way to start. You can use the pre-minced, but it never tastes as good. So just get in the habit of using fresh garlic. Buy it often and use it often. Notice what I did there was I just pressed the garlic with the back of my knife, and that helps the paper come off really smoothly, and brush off those little skins, and it's ready for a quick chop. So you can use shallots, which is on your recipe, or you can use onion and garlic, which is a great combination, and it's very similar in flavor. The French use shallots all the time. We Americans and we Texans aren't in the habit of buying shallots as much, and that's why I wanted to show you that you can absolutely use this blend of garlic and red onion, and it will be absolutely fine in your dish. All right, so now we've got our beautiful amber colored arborio rice. We've added a little bit of the olive oil in with those sauteed shallots, and now we're ready to add in the next step. So here is our white wine. Now we got the sizzle going. Now the cooking process will start a little bit faster, and notice I'm always putting in a very small amount at a time. This particular rice does take some patience. As we're moving our spoon across the skillet, we want to see that there's not so much moisture that it's falling into the center. So that's kind of our trick. Now we'll start adding in a little bit of our chicken broth, or of course in my case this is veggie broth, because this dish is completely vegan. So I'm doing about a half a cup at a time. And you can always go slower. I am being a little conservative with how much of the moisture I'm putting in, because I really want you to get to see how gradually stirring it is going to make such a difference in the end result of this beautiful rice. This is a great dish to do with friends, so you can take your time and really let the rice cook gradually. Overall, it's going to take about 20 minutes cook time to get the rice just where we want it. Notice how when I'm dragging the spoon across, it's still coming to the center, which means it's not ready for more rice or more broth to be added to the rice. But that is looking gorgeous. So I just want to keep it moving. I want to have enough time for the fluid to evaporate and really just to be absorbed by those little granules of that arborio rice. There, it's coming together. That looks just about right. It's almost ready for my next batch of broth. Yeah, that looks great. And you can tell that now the granules are starting to get a little plumper, starting to look really pretty. The more we can hold out, the better. And you should have your temperature at about medium high. So on my fancy little oven here, I've got it at 375, 380 degrees. Okay, that's ready for its next little pour in. So another about half a cup. So again, if you wanted to get creative, you could leave out the mushrooms altogether and do a different vegetable. Another way to make the risotto is with asparagus. Some people that are really asparagus fans, again, you would keep them raw until the very last minute, and you could put them into this mixture and let them lightly steam saute with your mixture of wine and broth, and it comes out so good. So whether you choose the butternut or the asparagus, or even what we're going to do today with the mushrooms. Just know that the trick with making the arborio really work is take your time and slowly adding in that liquid. Look how pretty it is. It's almost there. It's got lots of bubbles going on. Now in this particular batch, I've used about half of the ingredients, and so I want to make sure that you get to see it all the way to the end. But you could easily put your whole batch in, like the recipe that I gave you, and see how beautiful it turns out. It's coming along. That's absolutely gorgeous. See how it's starting to come together, but it might need another couple of minutes. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds, and I'm going to chop up our tomatoes, because that's going to be a beautiful garnish for the end product. And notice here I've got these beautiful cherry tomatoes. So I'm going to do a fairly thick chop. Again, we just want to have a little color. At our very end, when we're serving up our plate, we always know that the eyes eat first. So I want to make sure that our palate is wowed and our eyes are wowed first. I'm going to do probably 3 or 4 tomatoes, and I'm just going to drizzle them over the end product. I could even add a little bit of that fresh red onion. So now I've got different hues of red, and I could even add, of course, my fresh thyme at the very end. Look at that, it's ready for its next batch of water. And see how pretty they're starting to become. All right, here comes the broth. Another half cup. If you didn't have a homemade broth, you could certainly add in a bay leaf at this spot. Let me show you an option. If you didn't have any homemade vegetable broth, you could buy a Central Market brand vegetable broth that's really good. It's not like homemade, but it's definitely a good one. And during the cooking process, you could add in your bay leaf, and it's still going to give it a wonderful added flavor. You could even add in your whole thyme or your whole rosemary right into the cooking process and let it really mix in and get lots of flavor. And then at the end of the cooking, pull your rosemary or your whole thyme out. That way you don't have a big stem to contend with at the end. Now the thyme is pretty delicate, so I'm going to leave it in there just for a couple more minutes, and you'll see how those little leaves just pull right off the stem, and it's pretty easy to pull out. And oh, if you could smell it, it's just amazing. So it's still coming along beautifully. It's got maybe another 30 seconds. And my next add-in, I'm going to do a little bit more wine, and I'm going to be ready for the mushrooms. So it's slowly pulling to the center. When I lived with the French family, we often made risotto, and we served it with one of their favorite dishes, which was coq au vin, and that's a chicken that's cooked in a wine sauce. And so it was a great combination. We even went out to the garden, and especially exciting if it had just rained, because we would gather, no kidding, we would gather some escargot. So we would actually get garden snails, and we would put them into this special big bin. And sadly, we would salt them, which brings them rapidly to their death. And the kids that I grew up with, or spent the time with there with the French family, they were so excited. They loved to be the ones to gather the snails and clear them out and process them for dinner that night. So it was a really fun experience. So look at this, it's coming along absolutely beautifully. I'm going to add in the last little bit. So remember, on your best foods list, complex carbohydrates are absolutely key. We never want to leave them out thinking that we're doing ourselves justice by taking out carbohydrates. We want complex carbohydrates. We want them to taste great. We want them to be homemade as much as possible. And they don't need to be high in fat. They definitely need to be rich in fiber, and always practicing portion control when we have our best foods list, and especially when we're using a complex carb. So arborio rice is definitely in that category, and it's a wonderful way to celebrate a culturally relevant dish, and it's a great way to add satiety and a real comfort food to any plate. You could serve this vegan, maybe on the top of some sauteed kale, or you could even have a meat in it, like my French friends with the coq au vin, or you could serve it with lamb chops. It's a great way to do it. Or even some quickly grilled flank steak. So just keep in mind that there's so many beautiful ways to do risotto. We just want to make sure that you take your time in making it. You use some wonderful flavors like fresh thyme and bay, and of course the mushrooms enriched by giving us extra vitamin D, along with our complex carbs. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and let me know when you make this dish. I'd love to see how yours comes out. See you soon.